I stood there, frozen, staring at my life scattered across the sidewalk of Silver Lake. 4 suitcases, hangers swaying in the breeze, and cardboard boxes labeled "Mom's Stuff" in hastily scrawled Sharpie. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over my belongings, making them look like abandoned remnants of a yard sale nobody wanted to visit. The note in my trembling hands felt like a slap across my face. "If you still want to live here, there's the doghouse in the backyard." Melissa's handwriting. My daughter-in-law's final verdict on my worth after 20 years of family dinners, shared holidays, and countless moments I thought meant something. I had just spent 2 weeks in the hospital, battling pneumonia, lying, alone in that sterile room, comforting myself with thoughts of coming home. Home. The word now felt like ashes in my mouth. The same home where I'd raised Andrew, where Richard and I had built our life, where I still faithfully paid the $130 monthly mortgage payment, even though the deed had passed to Andrew and Melissa after Richard's death. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and I looked up at the gathering storm clouds, dark and heavy with promise. How fitting. My clothes would be soaked soon, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The house loomed behind my scattered possessions, its windows like accusatory eyes. Through the kitchen window, I caught a glimpse of Melissa's silhouette, purposefully turning away. My fingers found my phone in my pocket, muscle memory taking over as I pulled up my banking app. There it was, the latest mortgage payment, automated and faithful as always. The same payment that had kept this roof over their heads while they plotted my removal. I remembered the whispers when I'd suggested renovating the kitchen, the gradual disappearance of furniture from my garage apartment, the cold shoulders at breakfast. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, dotting the sidewalk with dark circles. A neighbor walked by, eyes averted, quickening their pace. I wanted to call out to say, "Look at this! See what they're doing to me!" But my voice stayed locked in my throat, decades of dignity holding back the scream that wanted to tear free. My hand shook as I dialed Marianne's number, my oldest friend from Echo Park. The phone rang 3 times, each ring echoing the pounding of my heart. I watched a raindrop slide down one of my hanging blouses, remembering how I'd worn it to Andrew's college graduation. The same Andrew who was probably upstairs right now, letting his wife throw his mother out like yesterday's garbage. "Eleanor?" Marianne's warm voice came through just as lightning split the sky. "What's wrong?" My voice cracked, and I swallowed hard. "I need help, Marianne. They've put all my things outside. I don't have anywhere to go." The rain began to fall in earnest now, and I watched as water seeped into the cardboard boxes, threatening to dissolve the makeshift barriers between my possessions and the cruel world outside. But something else was dissolving too. My illusions about family, about loyalty, about the meaning of home. And in their place, something harder was beginning to form. Marianne's guest room wasn't much, just a twin bed and a dusty dresser. But as I sat on the edge of the mattress that evening, wrapped in her old flannel robe, it felt like sanctuary. My wet clothes hung in her bathroom, and the smell of brewing coffee drifted up from her kitchen. Outside, the storm raged on, matching the tempest in my heart. "I should have seen it coming," I said when Marianne brought up a steaming mug. The signs were everywhere, like breadcrumbs leading to this moment. I thought back to the day Richard and I bought that house in Silver Lake, 35 years ago. We'd been so young, so full of dreams. Richard worked at the architectural firm downtown, while I waited tables at diners to help make ends meet. Every spare dollar went into making that house a home. I planted the garden myself, nurtured roses that still bloom every spring, installed the window seats where Andrew used to read his comic books, Remember how Richard used to joke that I was the backbone of the family? I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. He'd say, "Eleanor keeps us all standing straight. That's why he trusted me to handle the finances, even after..." My voice trailed off, remembering the cancer diagnosis that changed everything. 6 months of watching Richard fade, of hospital bills mounting, of Andrew's lost expression at the funeral. He was 28 then, newly married to Melissa, both of them struggling with student loans and entry-level jobs. "That's when I suggested they take the house," I continued, the memory sharp as broken glass. Richard had left it to Andrew, in his will anyway. I thought I was helping them start their life together, but I kept paying the mortgage. It seemed right. I had my widow's pension, my savings. They were just starting out. Marianne sat beside me, her weight making the old bed creak. "And they let you." "They did more than let me. They encouraged it." Melissa would leave the mortgage statements on my kitchen table highlighted and ready. When I moved into the converted garage apartment, they said it was to give them space to start a family. I believed them. I wanted to believe them. I took a sip of coffee, remembering all the small humiliations. The way Melissa would rearrange my carefully organized kitchen when I cooked family meals. The gradual disappearance of my photos from the walls, replaced by her family portraits. The way she'd accidentally donate my things during her spring cleaning. "You know what hurts the most?" I set the mug down, my hands trembling. I kept thinking if I just tried harder, if I just did more, they'd see me as family again. I learned Melissa's favorite recipes. I stayed quiet when they painted over the wall marks, showing Andrew's growth. I even gave them my wedding china, when Melissa mentioned liking it. Marianne's hand found mine, squeezed it tight. "Oh, Eleanor," but now I realize I've been paying for my own erasure. Every mortgage payment was another brick in the wall between us. And today, when I saw my life scattered on that sidewalk, my voice hardened. Something in me snapped, Marianne. Not broke, snapped into place. I stood up, walking to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could see the lights of Echo Park twinkling like stars, fallen to earth. Each one represented a home, a story, a life. Somewhere out there was my story too, waiting to be reclaimed. "I'm done being the backbone for people who want to break me," I said. And for the first time that day, my voice didn't shake. "It's time I stand up straight for myself." Morning came with the kind of clarity that only arrives after a night of tears. I sat at Marianne's kitchen table, watching her brew her signature strong coffee while she made calls. Her efficiency both comforted and impressed me, especially when she mentioned her nephew Brandon was coming over. "He's an attorney," she'd said, eyes gleaming with purpose. My phone buzzed again, another text from Andrew. I'd received 5 since dawn, each one progressively more hostile. The latest read, "Mom, you're being dramatic. Melissa just needed to clean the garage apartment. Come back and we'll talk about it." Clean the garage apartment. The words made my coffee taste bitter. I remembered the day they'd first suggested I move into that converted space, 3 years ago. "It'll be like having your own little house," Melissa had said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "And we'll be right there if you need anything." What followed was a masterclass in subtle erosion. First, they borrowed my furniture for their guest room. Then my washer and dryer mysteriously broke, always when I was out. The heating worked sporadically. The windows started sticking. Each complaint was met with delayed responses and half-hearted solutions. "Eleanor!" Marianne's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Brandon's here." He entered like a burst of fresh air, young, sharp-eyed, carrying a leather briefcase that seemed too mature for his boyish face. "Aunt Marianne told me what happened," he said, settling at the table. "Let's talk about your options." I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app. "I've been paying the mortgage since Richard died, every month without fail. $1,080. Brandon's eyebrows rose as I showed him the transaction history. "And your name isn't on the deed?" "No. When Richard passed, we transferred it to Andrew and Melissa. I swallowed hard. I thought it was the right thing to do." He started taking notes, his pen scratching against legal paper. "Tell me about the garage conversion. Was there a formal rental agreement?" "No. They said it was family. We didn't need paperwork." The words tasted like ash now. "And the mortgage payments? Did they ever offer to take them over?" I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Actually, they became more insistent about me keeping them up. Melissa would remind me every month, leave the statements out. Once when I was late because of a bank error, she acted like I'd committed some terrible betrayal." Brandon's pen stopped moving. He looked up, something sharp in his gaze. "Mrs. Mitchell, have you ever heard of equitable mortgage?" The term was new to me, but the way he said it made hope flutter in my chest. "It's a legal principle," he continued, warming to his topic. "When someone contributes to property payments with the understanding they have a stake in the property, they may have legal rights, even without their name on the deed." Marianne, who'd been quietly listening, suddenly slapped the table. "So all those payments could give Mrs. Mitchell a legal claim to the property, yes." Brandon started writing faster. "Especially given the length of time, the consistent payments, and the fact that she was living there." My hands began to shake, but not from fear this time. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying..." Brandon looked up with a smile that reminded me of Richard when he'd solved a particularly challenging architectural problem. "That they might have thought they were slowly pushing you out, but they were actually giving you ammunition. Every payment you made, every month you lived there, every time they acknowledged your contribution, they were building your case." The room seemed to tilt slightly, possibilities rearranging themselves like pieces of a kaleidoscope. I thought of the mortgage statements Melissa had so carefully preserved, the text messages about payments, the emails discussing house maintenance. "Here's what we're going to do," Brandon said, pulling out more paper. "First, we're going to document everything. Then we're going to send a very carefully worded letter. And then... I leaned forward, feeling something unfamiliar blazing in my chest. It took me a moment to recognize it. Power. "Then we're going to show them that sometimes the people you try to erase write themselves back into the story, in permanent ink." That evening, after Brandon left with his briefcase full of notes and promises, I sat alone in Marianne's garden. The air was heavy with jasmine, reminding me of my own carefully tended roses back home. Home. The word didn't hurt quite as much now, transformed from a wound into a goal. I opened my banking app again, but this time with different eyes. The mortgage payment was due in 3 days. Another $1,080 that would quietly leave my account, just as it had for years. My finger hovered over the automatic payment setting. One tap and I could end this monthly tribute to people who saw my devotion as weakness. "You haven't touched your tea," Marianne said, settling into the chair beside me. She'd been giving me space all afternoon, understanding that Brandon's revelations needed time to sink in. "I've been thinking about Richard," I replied. letting my phone rest in my lap. About something he used to say when we first bought the house. He'd tell Andrew, "Son, a home isn't just walls and a roof. It's a statement about who you are." I picked up the cooling tea, more for something to hold than to drink. These years I've been letting them make statements about who I am. Every time they moved my things without asking. Every time they forgot to invite me to family dinners in my own house. Every time Melissa rearranged my kitchen cabinets. They were writing my story for me. And now? Marianne's question hung in the twilight air. Now I'm going to write my own. I straightened in my chair, feeling the backbone Richard always praised me for. Brandon said we need evidence, right? Well, I know exactly where to find it. I pulled out a small notebook I'd bought at the drugstore. Earlier, nothing fancy, just a simple spiral-bound pad. But as I began to write, it became something more. A blueprint for reclaiming my dignity. First, I listed every home improvement I'd paid for since Richard's death. The new water heater in 2021, the roof repairs last summer, the gardening service I still managed every month. Then I moved on to the texts, the emails, the conversations where they'd acknowledged my contributions while slowly pushing me toward invisibility. "I need to go back to the house," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "There's a box in the attic, Richard's old papers. He kept everything, you know. Every contract, every letter, every receipt." "Is that wise?" Marianne leaned forward, concern etching her features. "After what they did?" I smiled, and it felt like trying on an old piece of jewelry I'd forgotten I owned. They're not expecting me to fight back. That's their weakness. They think they've already won. They'll be at work tomorrow, and I still have my key. I'll go in, get what I need, and leave. No confrontation, no drama. I opened my phone's calendar, creating a new entry. Not just for tomorrow's mission, but for every step ahead. When to cancel the automatic payment. When to have Brandon send the letter. When to make my move. "You're different," Marianne observed, studying my face in the gathering dusk. "Something's changed." She was right. The shame and hurt were still there. But they'd been transformed, like coal under pressure becoming diamond. Every slight, every manipulation, every cruel little erosion of my presence. They weren't weighing me down anymore. They were fueling me. "You know what the irony is?" I said, closing my notebook. "They thought they were teaching me my place, showing me how small I could become. Instead, they taught me exactly how much I'm worth. Every dollar I paid, every indignity I endured, every quiet yes to their demands. It wasn't weakness, it was investment. And now?" I finally took a sip of my cold tea, tasting possibility instead of bitterness. "Now it's time to collect." The house looked different in the morning light. Less like a home and more like a fortress I needed to infiltrate. I parked Marianne's car a block away, my heart drumming against my ribs as I watched Andrew's Tesla and Melissa's Prius pull out of the driveway, right on schedule. They never deviated from their routine. Andrew to his tech startup downtown, Melissa to her real estate office in Los Feliz. I gave them 15 minutes to clear the area before approaching. My key still worked. They hadn't changed the locks yet, probably assuming I'd be too broken to return. The house smelled of Melissa's expensive coffee and that artificial lavender. She sprayed everywhere, trying to mask the old house scent I'd always loved. The attic stairs creaked under my feet, each sound making me pause and listen. But the house remained silent, holding its secrets close. Up here, the air was thick with dust and memory. Cardboard boxes and plastic bins lined the walls, most labeled, in Melissa's precise handwriting. Christmas, tax records, old photos. But I was looking for something specific. Richard's old steamer trunk with the brass fixtures. I found it pushed into a corner, partially hidden behind Andrew's childhood bicycle. The lid was heavy, and opening it released a cloud of dust and the familiar scent of Richard's cedar shoe trees. Inside, beneath layers of old papers and folders, lay the brass-cornered box with his family crest, the one he'd brought from his parents' home in Boston. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. Inside, exactly as I remembered, were bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, his old journals, and there, the leather portfolio marked House Documents. I began to read, and the world around me faded away. My dearest Eleanor, one letter began, dated just weeks before his death. You've always been the backbone of this home. If you ever find yourself without walls, build with the right people. The paper crinkled under my tightening grip. He'd known, somehow, he'd known this might happen. Deeper in the portfolio, I found what Brandon needed. The original mortgage documents, statements showing my consistent payments even before Richard's death, letters from Andrew and Melissa acknowledging my financial contribution to the house. But it was Richard's journal that made me sink to the dusty floor, tears blurring my vision. I worry about Eleanor, he'd written. Andrew is changing. Or perhaps I'm only now seeing who he's become. The way he lets Melissa speak to his mother. The small cruelties they think I don't notice. I should have put the house in Eleanor's name, but I thought blood would be thicker than paper. I was wrong. A noise downstairs made me freeze. Footsteps? No. Just the house settling, speaking in its old wooden voice. Still, it was time to go. I carefully photographed each document with my phone, tucked the most important papers into my bag, and returned everything else exactly as I'd found it. But before I left, I did something that would have been unthinkable just days ago. I logged into my banking app and canceled the automatic mortgage payment. The next payment would have gone through tomorrow. $1,000 that would never leave my account again. As I closed the front door behind me, my phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. The mortgage payment usually posts by now. Is everything okay with your account? I smiled, tucked the phone back into my pocket without responding, and walked to Marianne's car. Let them wonder. Let them worry. For the first time in years, their anxiety wasn't my problem to solve. Back at Marianne's, I spread the documents across her dining room table. Brandon was coming over later, but for now, I just looked at them. Really looked at them. Each paper was a piece of armor I could wear, each signature a weapon I could wield. Richard's words echoed in my mind. Build with the right people. I picked up my phone and finally replied to Melissa's text, my fingers steady as I typed. Everything's exactly as it should be. Then I blocked both their numbers, poured myself a cup of coffee, and began to write out everything I wanted Brandon to know. The fortress they'd built to keep me out was about to become the battleground where I'd make my stand. The first signs of chaos arrived 3 days after I stopped the mortgage payment. I was having breakfast at Marianne's when her phone rang, Andrew's number flashing on the screen. She put it on speaker, giving me a questioning look. I nodded, taking a slow sip of my coffee. Aunt Marianne. His voice crackled through the speaker, strained in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager trying to explain a dented car. Is Mom with you? She's not answering her phone, and there's a situation with the mortgage. Marianne caught my eye, maintaining perfect calm. Andrew, honey, what kind of situation? The payment didn't go through. The bank called Melissa yesterday. We're late for the first time in, well, ever. Mom's not answering texts, calls, nothing. We're worried about her. Worried about the money, I thought, watching ripples form in my coffee cup. Not worried enough to check on me the day they left my belongings in the rain. That must be stressful, Marianne replied, and I marveled at her composure. Almost as stressful as finding your possessions on the sidewalk after a hospital stay. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crack foundations. That's not what happened, Andrew stammered. Melissa was just cleaning. The doghouse comment was a nice touch, Marianne continued, her voice sharp as cut glass. Very creative. Another silence, longer this time. When Andrew spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming something harder, more like Melissa's influence than the boy I'd raised. Look, if Mom's there, tell her she's making a big mistake. That house. She doesn't understand what she's doing. I found myself standing, hands pressed flat against Marianne's kitchen table. I understand perfectly well what I'm doing, Andrew. The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line told me he hadn't expected to hear my voice. Mom? Mom, listen. No, you listen. My voice was quiet, steady, surprising even me. For years I've listened to you and Melissa. I've watched you take and take, thinking, my love meant you could treat me like a tenant in my own home. But love doesn't mean what you think it means. It's not a blank check you can cash while pushing me into smaller and smaller spaces. This isn't like you, he said, but I heard the uncertainty in his voice. You're acting different. I'm acting like myself, Andrew. The self I had to hide to keep peace in a house I paid for. Speaking of which, you should expect a letter from my lawyer soon. Brandon's very thorough. He's quite interested in something called equitable mortgage. The sound of something dropping on his end, followed by muffled voices. Melissa must have been listening too. Good. Lawyer? Andrew's voice cracked. Mom, you can't be serious. We're family. Family? I felt a laugh bubble up, not bitter, but almost free. Family doesn't leave family's clothes in the rain. Family doesn't suggest the doghouse as accommodation. And family certainly doesn't expect their mother to pay a mortgage for a house they're slowly pushing her out of. More muffled conversation on their end, Melissa's voice rising in pitch. Then Andrew, trying to sound authoritative. This isn't over. You're right about that, I agreed, surprising myself with how calm I felt. This is just the beginning. After Marianne ended the call, she looked at me with something like awe. Eleanor Mitchell, I don't think I've ever seen this side of you. I picked up my coffee cup, noticed my hands weren't shaking anymore. Neither have they. That's been the problem all along. Later that afternoon, Brandon called with news. Andrew and Melissa had tried to list the house for sale online. But don't worry, he assured me. I've already filed a LES pendens. It's a legal notice that warns potential buyers about our pending claim on the property. Nobody will touch that house until this is resolved. I stood at Marianne's window, watching the sunset paint the sky in defiant shades of orange and pink. Somewhere across the city, in a house I'd paid for with more than just money, my son and his wife were learning that the woman they'd tried to erase had more than just a backbone. She had teeth. A week into my exile, Marianne suggested I needed to get out of her house. Not because I want you gone, she clarified over morning coffee, but because you need to remember who you are beyond all this. She handed me a newspaper clipping. Rose Cafe in Los Feliz was hiring servers. I haven't waited tables in years, I protested, but even as I said it, something stirred in my chest, A memory of financial independence, of conversations with strangers, of life beyond family drama. The cafe was smaller than I expected, tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop. Wind chimes tinkled above the door as I entered, and the scent of coffee and freshly baked bread wrapped around me like a warm embrace. Behind the counter, a woman in her early 30s looked up, dark curls escaping from her bandana. "We're not open for another hour," she started, then paused, really looking at me. "Unless you're here about the job posting?" "I am." I squared my shoulders, feeling oddly vulnerable. "I'm Eleanor Mitchell. I used to work at diners in Echo Park years ago." She introduced herself as Rosa, the owner, and gestured for me to sit at the counter. "Tell me about yourself, Eleanor Mitchell." I hadn't prepared for this question, hadn't thought about how to explain my situation. But sitting there, watching Rosa pull espresso shots with practiced ease, I found myself telling her everything about Richard, the house, Andrew and Melissa, the doghouse note, Brandon's legal strategy. The words poured out like water from a broken dam. When I finished, expecting pity or awkward silence, Rosa surprised me by laughing. "You know what? I love it. I absolutely love it." She slid a perfectly crafted cappuccino across the counter to me. My mother lost everything in her divorce because she was too polite to fight back, too worried about what people would think. She died still believing that sacrifice meant love. Rosa's eyes blazed. I promised myself I'd never let another woman confuse submission with grace. "I'm not sure I know how to be anything else," I admitted, cradling the warm cup. "But you do," she countered. "You stopped the mortgage payments. You got a lawyer. You're here, aren't you? Looking for work instead of crawling back to that garage apartment?" She leaned forward. "You know exactly how to stand up for yourself. You've just been taught it's wrong to do it." The cappuccino was perfect. Just the right balance of bitter and sweet, like the truth Rosa was serving alongside it. "When can I start?" "Tomorrow," she said without hesitation. 6 a.m. We'll start you on morning shift. That's when all the interesting people come in. Writers, artists, the ones who need coffee like oxygen. She grinned. "And the tips are better." That night, back at Marianne's, I researched Rose Cafe online. The reviews painted a picture of more than just a coffee shop. It was a community, hub, a safe space, a place where stories were shared over perfectly brewed coffee. Rosa's Instagram showed poetry readings, local art exhibitions, community meetings. My phone buzzed. Another email from Melissa, this one marked urgent. I deleted it without reading it, just as I'd deleted the previous 6. Brandon was handling all communication now, and according to him, their attempts to sell the house had failed spectacularly. The Elice pendants he'd filed had scared away 3 potential buyers already. Instead of opening their emails, I pulled out the journal I'd started keeping. "Today," I wrote, "I remembered something important. I'm not just Richard's widow or Andrew's mother, or the woman they tried to relegate to a doghouse. I'm Eleanor Mitchell, and tomorrow I start writing a new chapter." I added a note about Rosa's cappuccino, about the way the wind chimes sang when I walked into the cafe, about the feeling of possibility that had nothing to do with mortgages or legal claims. For the first time since seeing my belongings on that rain-soaked sidewalk, I felt something close to excitement. My phone buzzed again. A text from Rosa. "Bring comfortable shoes tomorrow. And Eleanor, remember, serving coffee is just another way of taking up space in the world. Do it." Proudly, I smiled. thinking about how different this was from what Andrew and Melissa had expected. They thought they were pushing me into a corner, but instead, they'd pushed me out into the world. Tomorrow I would learn the cafe's coffee machine, memorize the menu, meet new people. I would earn my own money, make my own connections, build my own safety net, and somewhere across the city, in a house with an unpaid mortgage, they would wonder what else they'd underestimated about the woman they thought they could erase. My first week at Rose Cafe passed in a blur of coffee orders, morning rushes, and conversations that felt like tiny life preservers in a sea of change. I learned that Dr. Martinez from the clinic nearby likes his Americano with an extra shot, that the poetry professor from the community college always arrives at 7:15 sharp, that the young artists who cluster in the corner booth tip generously despite their obvious budget constraints. It was during a quiet moment between rushes when Melissa walked in. I was wiping down the counter, my back to the door, when Rosa's sharp intake of breath made me turn. There she stood, my daughter-in-law, looking oddly out of place in her real, estate power suit among the cafe's cozy, artistic atmosphere. "Eleanor," she said, her voice carrying that false sweetness I'd grown to recognize. "We need to talk." Before I could respond, Rosa stepped forward, positioning herself slightly between us. "I'm sorry, but Eleanor's working right now. If you'd like to order something, I'm happy to help." Melissa's perfect smile flickered. "This is a family matter." "And this is my cafe," Rosa replied, her tone gentle but firm. "Where my employees are treated with respect." I felt something warm bloom in my chest. Not anger, not fear, but a steady kind of strength. "I'm on break in 20 minutes, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "You can wait if you'd like. The lavender honey latte is our specialty." The next 20 minutes were a study in tension. Melissa sat at a corner table, alternating between checking her phone and watching me work. I continued taking orders, making drinks, chatting with regulars, all the while aware of her eyes following my movements. When my break came, Rosa squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "My office is open if you need it." I nodded gratefully, but chose instead to sit at Melissa's table. This was my space now, and I wouldn't be chased into hiding. "The house is going into default," Melissa began without preamble. "Is that what you want? To destroy everything we've built?" "Everything you've built," I corrected her. "On my foundation." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Be reasonable, Eleanor. This rebellion, it's not like you. Coming to work at a coffee shop, living with Marianne. What will people think?" I glanced around the cafe, at the local artists who taught me about their work, the writers who shared their stories, the students who treated me with genuine warmth. "They'll think I'm someone who refuses to live in a doghouse." That note. For the first time, I saw a crack in her composure. "I was angry. You have to understand you were becoming difficult. Always there, always watching, judging our choices. Paying your mortgage," I added quietly. "Supporting your dreams. Loving my son. We can fix this," she said, reaching for my hand, across the table. I pulled back before she could touch me. "Come home. We'll arrange something more formal. A proper rental agreement for the garage apartment." The old me might have wavered, might have grasped at this olive branch, however poisoned it was, but that Eleanor had been left in the rain with her belongings. "No," I said, and the word felt like freedom. "I don't need a rental agreement. I need what's mine. Nothing is yours." The words exploded from her, loud enough that several customers turned to look. Your name isn't on anything. You're just the mother-in-law who couldn't let go. Rosa appeared at our table, a presence both calm and immovable. I think it's time for you to leave. Melissa stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. This isn't over. You're right, I agreed, standing as well. Brandon will be in touch about the court date. We'll see what a judge thinks about my years of mortgage payments. After she left, Rosa brought me a cup of chamomile tea. You okay? I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, realizing that I was. More than okay, actually. You know what's strange? A month ago, that conversation would have shattered me. Now, it just makes me more certain. Certain of what? That I'm not fighting for a house anymore. I took a sip of tea, letting its warmth spread through me. I'm fighting for every woman who's ever been told to make herself smaller, to accept less, to be grateful for crumbs. I'm fighting for the Eleanor who paid that mortgage, who loved without conditions, who deserved better than a doghouse. Rosa smiled, that fierce, protective smile I'd come to know well. Then let's make sure you win. The court date was still 2 weeks away when Melissa made her biggest mistake. I was serving the morning rush at Rose Cafe when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Rosa's brow furrowed as she checked her own phone, then called me over to the counter. Eleanor, you need to see this. She showed me a video that was rapidly circulating on local social media. There was Melissa, perfectly coiffed and sitting in what I recognized as her real estate office, looking directly into the camera with carefully manufactured concern. I never thought I'd have to make this video, she began, her voice trembling just enough to seem genuine. But as a real estate professional and someone deeply involved in our community, I feel obligated to share our story. My mother-in-law, who we've supported for years, has become aggressive and unstable. The video continued, painting a picture so distorted it was almost unrecognizable. According to Melissa, I was a burden they'd carried out of love, ungrateful for their generosity, now vindictively trying to steal their home. She even managed to produce tears when describing how they'd gently suggested I might be happier in a senior living facility. All we wanted was to start our own family, she concluded, wiping her eyes with a manicured hand. Now she's holding our home hostage, refusing to let us move forward with our lives. Please share this to raise awareness about elder manipulation and the importance of protecting young families. The cafe had gone quiet, regulars gathering around to watch. Dr. Martinez removed his glasses, cleaning them with more force than necessary. The poetry professor was scribbling furiously in her notebook, her coffee forgotten. She's trying to control the narrative, Rosa said, her voice tight with anger. Get ahead of any legal proceedings by painting you as the villain. I should have felt devastated, watching my daughter-in-law spread lies about me online. Instead, I felt an odd sense of calm. She doesn't realize what she's done, does she? Rosa raised an eyebrow. She's just proved that this was never about family. I pulled out my phone, opened my messages to Brandon. She's proved it's about power. The next morning, Rosa gathered the cafe staff before opening. I have an idea, she announced, but I need everyone's consent. She outlined her plan, looking each of us in the eye. Every single person nodded. When we opened the doors, customers found something new alongside their usual coffee menu. A massive chalkboard with elegant script reading, Eleanor's story. Below it, Rosa had written a simple, powerful account of what really happened. The years of mortgage payments, the hospital stay, the rain-soaked belongings, the doghouse note. At the bottom, she'd added, This is what displacement looks like. This is what fighting back looks like. Throughout the day, something extraordinary happened. Customers began adding their own stories on smaller cards we provided. Tales of family betrayal, of standing up to injustice, of finding strength in community. The wall became a testament to shared resilience. Dr. Martinez wrote about his mother's similar experience with his sister. The poetry professor shared verses about inherited trauma and generational healing. Even the young artists contributed, creating powerful sketches about housing inequality and family dynamics. By afternoon, local news had picked up the story. A reporter from the Echo Park Tribune sat at the counter, interviewing me between coffee orders. "This isn't just about a house anymore, is it?" she asked. I looked at the wall of stories, at the faces of customers who had become allies, at Rosa fielding calls from other business owners wanting to show support. "No," I replied. "It's about every person who's ever been told to accept less than they deserve. It's about saying enough when the world expects you to say, okay." That evening, Brandon called with news that made Rosa whoop with joy. Melissa's video had backfired spectacularly. The timestamps on her social media campaign, compared with the legal documentation we'd already filed, suggested a clear attempt to manipulate public opinion before court proceedings. Moreover, her public accusations about my mental state without evidence could be considered defamation. "The judge isn't going to like this," Brandon said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "She's basically documented their pattern of elder abuse for us. We couldn't have asked for better evidence." After closing, Rosa brought out a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a special occasion. As we sat among the empty tables, she raised her glass. "To Eleanor Mitchell," she declared, "who taught us all that sometimes the strongest word in the English language is no." I thought about Melissa's tears in that video, about Andrew's silence in all of this, about the house that had become both battlefield and symbol. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, surrounded by the stories of strangers who had become champions, I finally understood. They hadn't made me homeless. They had pushed me into a bigger home than they could possibly imagine. The Sunday before the court date, Andrew came to Rose Cafe. Unlike Melissa's power-suited entrance, he arrived just before closing, shoulders hunched, looking more like the uncertain boy who used to ask for help with his math homework than the tech executive he'd become. I was wiping down tables when he walked in. Rosa, who had started staying late with me after Melissa's visit, emerged from the kitchen but remained at a distance, giving us space while staying within earshot. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Can we talk?" I gestured to a clean table by the window, where the setting sun painted everything in shades of amber. He sat down heavily, looking at his hands rather than at me. "I saw the wall," he said, nodding toward our story collection, which had grown so large we'd had to extend it twice. Is that really how you felt all these years?" I took my time answering, studying my son's face. There were new lines around his eyes, a tension in his jaw that reminded me of Richard when he was troubled. "How did you think I felt, Andrew?" He shifted uncomfortably. I thought we were doing what was best for everyone. Melissa said having you in the garage apartment would be perfect. You'd have your independence. We'd have help. With the mortgage, it would be like a real multi-generational home. And when did help with the mortgage become pay the entire mortgage? I kept my voice gentle, but he flinched anyway. When did my independence become isolation? When did family become something that could be stored in a converted garage and forgotten? "We didn't forget you," he protested, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "We were just busy, building our lives, and you seemed fine with everything. Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? I leaned forward. We seem fine. We smile through the small cruelties, accept the gradual erasure, tell ourselves it's normal for children to outgrow their parents, until one day we find ourselves standing in the rain, staring at a note about a doghouse. He had the grace to look ashamed. Melissa wrote that note. I didn't know. But you didn't stop her, I interrupted, surprising us both with my firmness. You didn't help me bring my things inside. You didn't call to check if I had somewhere to go. You didn't even ask why I was in the hospital. Silence stretched between us, filled with the soft whir of the cafe's ceiling fans and the distant sound of traffic on Sunset Boulevard. Finally, Andrew spoke again, his voice small. Why were you in the hospital? Pneumonia, I said, watching his face fall. I caught it cleaning mold out of the garage apartment's bathroom after that leak you kept saying you'd fix. I was there for 2 weeks, alone. He pushed back from the table abruptly, running his hands through his hair. A gesture so like Richard, it made my heart ache. I can fix this, he said, more to himself than to me. We can figure something out. Maybe we could refinance, put your name on the deed. It's too late for that, Andrew. Because of the lawsuit? He looked up, desperate. We can stop it, call off the lawyers, start over. I shook my head, feeling an unexpected surge of compassion for this man who was still, in some ways, my little boy. No, it's too late because I've finally learned what I'm worth, and it's more than a garage apartment, more than silent payments, more than being tolerated in my own home. Rosa appeared with 2 cups of chamomile tea, setting them down without a word before disappearing again. The familiar scent reminded me of all the times I'd made tea for Andrew when he was sick, when he was studying, when his first girlfriend broke his heart. You know what I've realized? Working here? I wrap my hands around the warm cup. Family isn't just blood and mortgages. It's not even about the house, really. It's about who sees you, who makes space for you, who fights to keep you in their story instead of writing you out of it. We're still your family, he said, but the words sounded more like a question than a statement. Yes, you are, I agreed. But you're not my only family anymore, and you're certainly not my whole world. As if to emphasize my point, the door chimed and Dr. Martinez stuck his head in, despite the closed sign. Eleanor, just wanted to drop off those legal articles I mentioned. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. It's fine, I said, standing. Thank you, Robert. I'll read them tonight. Andrew watched this exchange with new eyes, finally seeing what he and Melissa had created. Not a dependent old woman, but someone who had built a life they knew nothing about. Someone with supporters they couldn't intimidate. Someone who had grown stronger in the very spaces they'd tried to make her smaller. The court date is Wednesday, I said as he stood to leave. Brandon says it should be quick. The evidence is pretty clear. He nodded, looking lost. At the door, he turned back. Mom, I'm sorry for not seeing. I know, I said, and I did. But as I watched him walk away, I realized that sometimes sorry isn't enough. Sometimes you have to lose something to understand its value. And sometimes what you lose isn't what you thought you were fighting for in the first place. The courthouse steps were already crowded when I arrived that Wednesday morning. Rosa had closed the cafe for the day, and she stood with Marianne, Brandon, and a small army of Rose Cafe regulars who had come to show support. Dr. Martinez was there in his white coat, having rescheduled his morning appointments. The poetry. Professor had brought her entire writing group. "Your own cheering section," Marianne whispered, squeezing my hand as we walked inside. Richard would have loved this. The courtroom felt smaller than I'd imagined, more intimate somehow. Andrew and Melissa sat on one side with their lawyer, both wearing expressions of grim determination. Melissa had traded her usual real estate glamour for a conservative blue suit that screamed, "responsible homeowner." Andrew couldn't seem to look at me. Brandon had prepared me for this moment, explained every step, but nothing could have readied me for the surge of emotion when the judge, a woman about my age with steel-gray hair and keen eyes, began reviewing the evidence. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said, looking over her glasses at Andrew and Melissa's lawyer. "Mrs. Mitchell has been paying the full mortgage amount of $1,080 monthly since her husband's death 5 years ago. She lived on the property in a converted garage apartment until she was effectively evicted following a hospital stay. And despite her consistent financial contribution, there was never any formal agreement about her equity in the property." "Your Honor," their lawyer began, "the payments were essentially rent." "Rent?" The judge's eyebrow arched. "For a garage apartment in Silver Lake? That exactly matched the mortgage payment?" She shuffled through some papers. "And I see here a rather disturbing social media video that Mrs. Mitchell's daughter-in-law posted, attempting to discredit her mental capacity before these proceedings." Melissa shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The video had backfired spectacularly, not just in public opinion, but now in court as well. Brandon stood, his young face serious. "Your Honor, we have documentation spanning 5 years of Mrs. Mitchell's contributions. Bank statements, text messages discussing payments, emails where the defendants explicitly acknowledged her role in maintaining the property. We also have evidence of improvements she funded. A new water heater, roof, repairs, regular gardening service." The judge nodded, then turned to me directly. "Mrs. Mitchell, why did you continue making these payments without protecting your interest in the property?" I stood, feeling the presence of my supporters behind me. "Because I thought I was protecting something more important. My family. I believed if I helped them enough, supported them enough, they would see me as essential, rather than expendable." I paused, steadying my voice. I was wrong. "And now? What do you want from these proceedings?" "I want what I've already paid for," I said simply. "I want the house I've been maintaining all these years. I'm willing to buy out their remaining equity, but I want my investment recognized." The judge looked thoughtful, then turned to Andrew and Melissa. "And you two, what did you think would happen when you left your mother's belongings in the rain? When you suggested she could live in a doghouse, did you think she would simply disappear?" Neither of them answered. In the silence, I could almost hear the echoes of Richard's words from his journal. "Build with the right people." What followed was a blur of legal terms and negotiations, but the outcome was clear. The judge ruled in my favor, citing the doctrine of equitable mortgage. I would have the opportunity to buy out Andrew and Melissa's remaining equity, and the house would be transferred to my name. Outside the courthouse, Rosa pulled me into a fierce hug. "You did it!" But watching Andrew and Melissa hurry down the steps, avoiding the cameras from the local news stations that had picked up the story, I felt no triumph. Instead, I felt something more complex, a mixture of sadness for what was lost and hope for what was found. "What now?" Marianne asked as we walked to her car. I thought about the house. My house now, legally and morally. Now I make it mine again. But differently this time. Different how? Well, for one thing, that garage apartment. I smiled, thinking of Rosa's earlier conversation about expanding the cafe. I think it would make a perfect small business incubator for young entrepreneurs who need a start. Maybe even a pop-up coffee shop. Rosa's eyes lit up. Eleanor Mitchell, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm suggesting that homes aren't just about having a roof over your head. They're about creating space for growth, for community, for second chances. I looked at the group of people surrounding me, my chosen family, my unexpected allies, my new foundation. And I think I know exactly how to build that. As we drove away from the courthouse, I caught a last glimpse of Andrew standing, alone on the steps, watching our car disappear into traffic. In that moment, I realized that sometimes winning isn't about defeating someone else. It's about finally, fully choosing yourself. The first night back in my house felt surreal. Standing in the empty living room, keys in hand, I listened to the familiar creaks and settling sounds that I'd known for decades. But now they spoke a different language. Not of loss and limitation, but of possibility. You don't have to do this alone, Marianne said, setting down a box of cleaning supplies. Rosa followed with bags of takeout dinner, and Dr. Martinez arrived moments later with a bottle of wine. The poetry professor and her writing group had offered to come help tomorrow with the actual moving and cleaning. It's strange, I said, as we settled on the floor with our impromptu picnic. I expected to feel more, triumphant. Instead, I just feel peaceful. Rosa poured the wine into paper cups. That's because this isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. We ate and planned, our voices echoing in the empty space. The house needed work. Andrew and Melissa had let things slide after I stopped paying the mortgage. The garden was overgrown, the kitchen dated, the garage apartment in need of serious renovation before it could become the small business incubator I envisioned. I found these in the attic, Marianne said, pulling out a stack of Richard's old architectural drawings. Look at his notes for the garage conversion. He actually designed it to be easily adapted into a commercial space. He thought maybe Andrew would want to start a business there someday. The blueprints brought tears to my eyes. Not of sadness, but of recognition. Richard had always been planning for the future, seeing possibilities where others saw limitations. Now I was doing the same. First things first, Rosa declared, pulling out a notebook. We paint over that awful grage Melissa chose for the living room. I'm thinking warm yellow, like morning light. And the garden needs attention, Dr. Martinez added. My sister's a landscape architect. She'd love to help restore it. Those roses you planted years ago? They're still there, just needed pruning. As night fell, we walked through each room, making lists and sharing ideas. The space that had felt so constricting under Andrew and Melissa's ownership now seemed to expand with each step. The kitchen would need updating, but not in the stark, Instagram-worthy way Melissa had wanted. Instead, I imagined warm woods, comfortable seating, space for people to gather. You know what this reminds me of? Marianne said, standing in the doorway of what used to be Andrew's childhood room. Remember when we were young and our idea of freedom was having a room of our own? This is like that, but bigger. You're not just reclaiming a house, you're reclaiming your right to take up space in the world. Later, after everyone left, I sat on the porch swing Richard had installed when Andrew was born. The neighborhood was quiet, the evening air soft with jasmine from the overgrown garden. From here, I could see the doghouse in the backyard. Melissa's final insult transformed into a symbol of liberation. Tomorrow, I would begin the work of transformation But tonight, I simply sat in my space, in my silence, in my victory, watching the stars emerge above my reclaimed home. 3 months after the court decision, the house had become unrecognizable, not just in its appearance, but in its spirit. The walls, now painted in warm yellow, seemed to glow from within. Richard's old fishing equipment, retrieved from storage, hung proudly in the study. Photos I'd kept hidden in boxes now lined the hallway, telling the story of a life fully lived. Richard and me in our youth, Andrew's childhood moments, and newer images of my chosen family at Rose Cafe. The garage apartment transformation was my greatest pride. Under Rosa's guidance, and with help from a contractor recommended by Dr. Martinez, we'd turned it into a charming satellite location of Rose Cafe. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The space meant to minimize me had become a thriving community hub. "I still can't believe the turnout," Rosa said one Sunday morning as we watched a line of customers form outside the garage cafe. The weekend pop-up had become a neighborhood sensation, with Rosa's signature drinks and my newly famous lavender scones drawing people from all over Silver Lake. The garden, too, had been reborn. Dr. Martinez's sister had worked magic, coaxing my old roses back to life and adding native plants that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds. The poetry professor's writing group now met there every Wednesday, their words mixing with the scent of blooming jasmine. "Eleanor!" Marianne called from the kitchen. "You've got to see this." I found her holding the local newspaper, grinning. There, in the community section, was a feature article. "Silver Lake's Renaissance Woman: How Eleanor Mitchell Turned Personal Crisis into Community Victory." The piece detailed not just my legal battle, but how the house had become a symbol of resilience and reinvention. "They want to interview you for their podcast series on women over 50, Marianne said, tapping the reporter's contact information. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Andrew. "Passed by the house today. The roses look like they did when I was a kid. The garage. It looks amazing. I'm happy for you, Mom." It was our first communication since the court date. I showed the message to Marianne, who squeezed my hand. "Are you going to respond?" "Not yet," I said, tucking the phone away. "Some gardens need time to grow." Later that afternoon, as I served coffee to a young woman who reminded me of myself at that age, she asked about the doghouse still visible in the corner of the garden. I'd kept it as a reminder, but not of bitterness. "It's there to tell a story," I explained, pouring her a refill. "About how sometimes the spaces others try to confine us in become the very places we learn to spread our wings." She nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. "My mother's going through something similar with my brother," she admitted. "I showed her the article about you. She's meeting with a lawyer next week." This, I realized, was the true victory. Not the house itself, but how its story had become a beacon for others. Every scone I baked, every coffee I served, every garden bloom I tended was an act of quiet revolution. I had learned that freedom isn't just about having your name on a deed. It's about creating spaces where others can find their strength too. 1 year to the day after I found my belongings on the sidewalk, I hosted a garden party. The roses were in full bloom, their scent mingling with coffee from the garage cafe and the sound of laughter. Rosa had closed the main cafe for the occasion, bringing her entire staff to help celebrate what she called the anniversary of Eleanor's liberation. The garden was filled with the people who had become my newfound family. Dr. Martinez brought his mother, who had recently won her own legal battle inspired by my story. The poetry professor and her students performed readings from their anthology, Houses of the Heart, dedicated to women reclaiming their spaces. Marianne moved through the crowd with a camera, documenting everything for what she called the next chapter of the revolution. Brandon, now handling cases for 3 other women in similar situations, raised a toast to Eleanor Mitchell, who taught us that sometimes the strongest foundations are built on broken ground. As the afternoon sun painted the garden in gold, I noticed a familiar figure hovering by the front gate. Andrew stood there, alone, holding something in his hands. After a moment's hesitation, I walked over to him. "I found this in my old boxes," he said, holding out a faded photograph. It showed the 3 of us, Richard, Andrew, and me, sitting on the porch swing the day we first moved in. I was holding a rose bush, dirt still on my hands from planting the garden that would one day bloom again. "Your father always said this house would be more than just walls and a roof," I said, taking the photograph. "He was right, just not in the way we expected." Andrew looked past me at the gathering, at the life I'd built from the ruins of what he and Melissa had tried to destroy. "Mom, he started, then stopped, struggling with words that came too late but needed to be said anyway. "I know," I said, and I did. Some wounds heal not through forgiveness, but through growth around the scars. "Would you like some coffee? Rosa's teaching me how to make her special lavender honey latte." He smiled, a small uncertain thing. "I'd like that." As we walked through the garden, past the doghouse now transformed into a whimsical herb planter, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, standing in the rain, watching my life being dismantled. I thought about Richard's words in his journal. "If you ever find yourself without walls, build with the right people." I had built something far stronger than walls. I'd built a community, a purpose, a statement about what women like me could do when we refused to be written out of our own stories. The garage cafe hummed with activity, its windows open to the garden party. Rosa caught my eye as I made Andrew's coffee, giving me a subtle nod of support. On the counter lay the latest letter from a publishing house, interested in turning my story into a book about late-life empowerment and community building. "It's different than I remember," Andrew said, looking around. "Yes," I agreed, handing him his coffee. "It's exactly as it should be." Above us, wind chimes Richard had hung decades ago tinkled in the breeze, their song unchanged but their meaning transformed. Like me, they had stayed true to their nature while learning to make new music with the wind that tried to shake them. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Give it a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.